Dr. Nelly Kadagi, who's flying in from Florida in the US. However, she is originally from Kenya, and a lot of her research is still done in Kenya, and she's still got a lot of really good collaborators. She works very closely with the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. Was actually awarded the WRFC Emerging Scientist Award for Scientific Excellence last year. So she's really, making strides in the Western Indian Ocean. And importantly, Nelly has really used wreckfish and especially bullfish to develop her to develop a research portfolio that doesn't only include one specific stakeholder. Nelly's research really it's from genetics to economics to biology. She's really a researcher that is is identifying issues in terms of coastal resource use along the East African coast, not only in Kenya. She works closely with researchers both like in Tanzania, Somalia, Mozambique, and more recently with us in South Africa. Both her and Nina was one of her PhD supervisors, really have broken those barriers in Kenya in terms of working with recreational anglers or sport fishers, as they're termed in Kenya themselves. She's really a leading example of an African researcher integrating complex socio-ecological systems for impactful research. And bullfish was a catalyst that she used, to try and really figure out these issues and figure out the stakeholders and the problems that need to be addressed, working closely with communities, with both recreational fishers and artisanal and small-scale anglers that are potentially at conflict and trying to solve that conflict between these groups. She's, again, a transdisciplinary scholar, and is also, over the past few years, my workings with Nelly and her colleagues like Nina and Sarah, who are also here, have been to trying to formalize recreational fisheries research in Africa. And if you were at the workshop on Sunday, you would have seen that we are slowly getting somewhere. It's a bit trickier than we always anticipate on how to do these things properly and get the best out of it. But even if you didn't attend the workshop on Sunday, but you would like to be part of the community of practice, to represent recreational anglers in Africa, please come and chat to either myself, Nelly, Nina, or anybody who was sort of in that workshop. But let me not talk for too long, and let me please introduce you to Dr. Nelly Kadagi, and I'm sure she's going to blow us all away. So thanks a lot.
Good morning, everyone. I have a very large voice, but I will use this because I've been told sometimes my voice disappears, and so that's why I'm relying on the mic, but I know I can shout up to where Matt is. Thank you so much, Alex, for the introduction. It's very good to be here today. 2 weeks ago, I wasn't sure if I'll be here, and so I'm just very excited and energized to be part of this movement in terms of the opportunities and the learnings that we can share together to enhance sport fisheries knowledge in this region and other parts of the world. I want to give a big shout out to Professor Warren, who I first met in Berlin in 2011, the local organizing team, and many of you for coming here. And so please give yourself a round of applause. And please turn to your neighbor on the right and tell them it's good to see you here. And if you don't have a neighbor on the right, you can talk to the wall. As a young girl, growing up in a small village in Western Kenya, I was fascinated by images of sinking submarines and divers in deep waters on our family's black and white television. I saw images that gave me the curiosity of something that I thought I could be and something that I felt maybe I couldn't be. It was only in high school that I learned what I was seeing on our family TV was called an ocean. And those images I was seeing were submarines and divers. But this ocean was 17 plus hours by bus from my village. It wasn't until undergraduate when I first saw the ocean for the first time. But the first 2 years of my undergraduate, I was immersed in marine subjects and really scored highly, imagining what mangroves looked like, ocean wave breaking looked like, and corals looked like. But deep down, I knew there was something that was captivating my interest. In 2011, I traveled to present my first time talk and poster in Europe, and it's good to see Professor Arlingas here. I was reminding him yesterday that I was among the few delegates from Africa and one of the few students that the conference sponsored. And today, as I stand here, it's a full circle, a journey of realities and illusions. Illusions of an ocean that I didn't know what it could be. Reality that's evidenced by the journey of walking through my village to Berlin and now standing here to give this talk. And so in these realities, I'm inspired by the case studies of the work we've done across the West Indian Ocean and other parts of Africa. And so I'll be looking at what the journey has been, what the presence looks like, and what the future holds for us. But in this moment, I remember the first time I came across a black marlin at a fish landing site. I was very curious to know who catches this fish. How many are they? How big do they grow? And for the last 15 years, I've been inspired by this journey that has led us to collect different case studies of this work, as Alex mentioned, to try and understand what is it that we can learn from these fisheries and continue to pass down the knowledge. But before I dive deeper, I want to reflect on 3 areas that inspire my talk today. The first one is the power of great mentorship. And I give a great note to one of my all-time mentors, Dr. Julian Pepperell, whom in one of our trips to several countries across the West Indian Ocean region, he made sure he reminded sport fishing anglers that I was an expert in my own right, that I deserved to be in that space. Even when they asked, does your father own a sport fishing boat? And why are you here? Have you ever caught a marlin? Those moments as an early career researcher inspire me today on the realization that we still have exclusivity in a fisheries like this, and it's pretty hard for many researchers that are trying to venture into this field. But with Dr. Julian Pepperell, we were able to characterize sport and recreational fisheries in Kenya, La Reunion, Mauritius, and Seychelles, and developed standardized data collection and reporting platform for national fisheries institution. The second reflection is the power of collective action. I've been privileged to work with fishing communities from across the region who have voluntarily collected 40 plus years of data that has continued to inform what we know today about this magnificent species. The two circles I'm showing is of a striped marlin that was recaught on the west coast of Australia in Perth, having traveled over 5,000 miles, covering 195 days. And another black circle of a swordfish that was caught in the mid-Indian Ocean ridge, having traveled for 123 days, covering over 3,000 miles. These are examples of what we call collective action to understand a species that has had great importance in this region. In addition to this power of collective action, is in 2012, when the president of the International Game Fish Association, Rob Kramer, said, Nelly, come over to Florida and we'll give you satellite tags. Rob took a chance on me, and this saw us deploy the first time satellite tags on marlin on the east coast of Africa, complementing the work that we've done on conventional tags. This memory has stayed with me as one of the most inspiring actions when it comes to the power of collective efforts. And the last reflection is the power of collaboration. Many of you have seen Nina, and we hung out together as a research collaborator, but also, as Alex mentioned, Nina was on my PhD committee, someone that I have deep respect for. But the one thing we share is that desire to continue enhancing capacity for our fisheries in the continent. And so together, we ask ourselves the question, how can we make sure that we are not the only ones that are writing this history? And so, taking the power of collection, great mentorship, and collaboration, it brings me to this moment in September 23rd, 2017, when Nina and I were sitting at one of our favorite dancing club in a small fishing village. And every time I tell this story, I have to apologize to Nina publicly because it was supposed to be a private moment. But this moment, I always say we were at a dancing club. And so, amidst dancing, we requested the waiter to give us a paper and a pen. And he brought this old receipt. And so at the back of the receipt, we sketched the vision of what we wanted capacity development to look like when you think about billfish and associated fisheries across the region. Don't look at my handwriting and judge it. When I'm not dancing, I write very well, but this was in the middle of dancing. But really, this journey set us up to start to think about what will it take if we really need to write a story, not just for ourselves, but for many others that will get to study these species. And so we submitted a proposal in 2018. It was unsuccessful. In 2019, we resubmitted again, and we were successfully funded by the West Indian Ocean Marine Science Association to focus on billfish fisheries across 5 countries in the West Indian Ocean region. In 2020, Nina was awarded the competitive and prestigious Pew Marine fellowship, which saw us add additional 5 countries to strengthen data collection and capacity development for conservation and management of billfish in the region. Taking these 2 additional sources of funding together, we were able to bring together 10 countries in the West Indian Ocean region so that we can start to think about what is it that we are looking for in terms of the objectives that we were setting together. In addition to our own work, we were commissioned by the Indian Ocean Commission to explore the existing knowledge on sport and recreational fisheries in the East Africa, Southern, and Indian Ocean region. And so this report covered 11 countries, and apart from the ones that we were covering for the 2 projects, we added Djibouti, Eritrea, and Sudan, which was a very great opportunity to understand what's going on in that part of the world. This work wouldn't have been possible without expertise from many collaborators across the countries that we get to work with regionally and internationally, bringing the largest billfish research collective in the continent. We also got to work with governments in Somalia and Comoros. And those researchers that have worked in Africa, you know very well how working in Somalia remains an illusion until today. But this opportunity gave us that ability to work with 4 universities across Somalia, learning so much about their vast fisheries, and we had students collect data on billfish, and for the first time, documenting striped marlin in artisanal fisheries. In Comoros, we worked with government officials, and one highlight of this was the discovery or the collection of data on the elusive short-billed spearfish. In my last 15 years of working on billfish, I've only seen 3 reportings for the elusive short-billed spearfish. It's not really, it's not very easy to see them. And so in our record for the last 40 years, we only have about 11 reportings. But what's interesting about Comoros is we've continued to see a lot of reporting for the short-billed spearfish, which is really cool because then it makes us ask more questions about what is it that is unique with Comoros that we are getting this elusive species. One thing I like to mention about this work is that many a times when we think about working with countries, language is a barrier. But one thing that we learned working across different regions was language is a reality. But we were able to translate this work in French, in Somali, in Portuguese, in Swahili, and English. And so to us, we realized that while language can be a barrier, in a place that has different multicultural context, it was a reality that we needed to face in that moment. This work wouldn't have been successful without incorporating early career researchers, students, and many interns. Some of these students have graduated, some are still continuing. And so with this collaborative effort, we set to explore 4 objectives: understanding the historical and present status of billfish and associated fisheries, understanding their spatio-temporal distribution, evaluating their genetic stock structure, and lastly, which is very important, understanding their socio-economic aspect. And so one may ask, Nina and Nelly, with this all collaboration and work that's happening, what have been the realities when it comes to sport and recreational fisheries in Africa, because our work does represent a very big portion of some of the case studies that we've published in the continent. And I'm going to dive a little bit into some of the realities. The first one is the reality of sustainable development management when it comes to marine, sport, and recreational fisheries. And in a paper that we published in 2021, our work revealed that these fisheries, like we already know, are data poor, which hinders the equitable and sustainable development which many countries in the West Indian Ocean aspire to. And particularly with the African Union pushing for the Africa we want, the ocean we want. And so the question is, how do we sustainably develop and manage sport and recreational fisheries when the reality is it's data poor, data deficient, and in some cases when it comes to local and indigenous knowledge, we've realized that many of these fisheries are lacking that local and indigenous understanding. But again, we've talked about citizen science, and in places like Kenya, Mozambique, Seychelles, here in South Africa, we've seen examples where communities have put in work so that we can continue to understand this fishery. But yet, we still can see them as opportunities for sustainable development, which is a reality for many of us. When we dived deeper into a review of billfish fisheries across 10 countries, the reality was what we already knew, but it was very important for us to bring together many people. And one special group that I have great respect for is the anglers who agreed to write papers with us. There is a paper, this particular paper, there's a section from Mozambique that was mostly written by one of our top anglers in the region, Duarte. And I remember pushing back and forth with the editors who kept telling us we need this particular section to look like science. And we told them this is actually science because this particular section has been written by someone who understands this fishery. And it remains one of our, it might look small, but it is one of our biggest wins to get Duarte to write a paper with us. Because that doesn't happen when it comes to our fisheries, when scientists want to be the only voices that are heard. And so with this work, again, data poor fisheries, but at the same time, there is opportunity in the region to continue to understand these fisheries and fill in the gaps that remain. The next reality is the complexity of managing highly migratory fisheries across different jurisdictions. And this paper published by one of our PhD students, he is now a doctor, Dr. Pascal Toya, revealed that different species of billfish share niche partitioning. They are found almost in the same places and co-occur in these places, which was interesting because when we correlated this data with areas of high distribution versus fishing effort, it was the same, whereby we were finding that both in the North Indian Ocean as well as Western Indian Ocean, this high niche partitioning as well as co-occurrence matches with areas of high fishing efforts, which are mostly in the areas beyond national jurisdiction, which calls for collaboration when it comes to these transboundary fisheries. In addition to understanding the stock distribution, this is one of the pieces of work that has taken us a long time. When we started with an undergraduate student who was able to just separate the DNA samples. Nina is my expert on DNA. I'm not. And so if I mention anything that doesn't look like it is genetics, just call me out and I will refer you to Nina. But this recent paper that we published showed that shellfish, particularly in the Indian Ocean, East and West Atlantic, share the same genetic connectivity, which is interesting because most of the time we see shellfish in the Indian Ocean and those in the Atlantic Ocean as separate population. We still have more work to do in this area because of how few genetic samples we had in this part of the world. You can see other places there's more samples. But it will be very interesting to think about how a species like shellfish is managed across transnational boundaries, but also across oceans when it comes to regional fisheries management organizations. And now there's the coolest part, the socioeconomics of billfish. And I lifted this paper as an example of the work we did on understanding the potential for conflicts in sport and sport, recreational, and artisanal fisheries, where we found that different factors, particularly or concerning users and governance, influence the potential for conflict. And this quote, "We cannot throw them back to the ocean like the sport fishers do. It's like playing with food," really brings that message home. You have a species that one group is targeting for food and the other group is targeting for leisure. And so those differing competing interests, particularly in places like Kenya, in places like Tanzania, Zanzibar, have brought a lot of conflicts when it comes to overlapping fishing areas. And there's actually a paper that we also published on competitive interactions when it comes to sport and artisanal fishers, where they are competing for the same resource, competing in the same areas, and competing at the same time. And sometimes you want to think that this is not the case because artisanal fishers have small boats. They are only looking for food. But one thing that this paper revealed was that we have always believed that we give a distinction between sport and artisanal. But in this case, when we did this work, we realized that we also have artisanal fishers that decide to do recreational fishing and catch billfish, not for leisure, but for leisure as well as for food, whereby they will take out visitors for leisure and then bring that marlin in for food. And so if you think about it, it challenges our dichotomous understanding when it comes to how we define sport fisheries and artisanal fisheries when it comes to a much needed species like these, that one marlin can feed up to 20 people, and then at the same time, one marlin needs to be released so that it can provide a tourism satisfaction. The last reality is accessibility to doing studies on sport and recreational fisheries. And when I was thinking about this reality, it took me back to the time when I was writing my PhD dissertation or collecting data. And most of the places you could find me were at the sport fishing bars. And I remember my auntie calling me and saying, "I need to know, why is it every evening you go to this place?" And I said, "Auntie, this is where I can only get my data to do my PhD." And I was also reflecting at the same time on an occurrence I had with Nina, where we had to go to Nick's place. Nick is one of the sport fishers in Kenya that has been keeping sport fishing data for the last 40 plus years, including some of Kenya's sport fishing international or world records. But you know, Nina fears dogs. Nina is afraid of dogs. And Nick had about 6 dogs. And so I remember being caught between wondering whether I should pursue the data or help Nina so that she does not have a heart attack, because the sight of dogs was really problematic. Why am I saying this story? The point I want to bring home is the history of sport fishing in the continent dates back to colonial times and has been linked to being a European pastime. And so many sport fishing clubs in the continent, and many of these places where you can find the right people and the right data, remain exclusive. And so the question is, how can an early career or student be able, how can I convince a student to follow my footsteps and make them believe that they can study a species that they too deserve to study it? And so as I reflect on these realities, I do recognize that the sport and recreational fisheries in the continent face illusions. And so it's important for us to understand these complexities so that it can give us the ability to navigate grounded in reality. Because it's so easy to be in a shadow or in the darkness when it comes to a fishery that is so important, yet it remains understudied in the whole of Africa with 50-something countries. The first illusion is the illusion of collaboration. Remember, I've said that I believe in the power of collaboration. And while we've built some of the most wonderful collaboration in the region, and as Alex mentioned about the award, I owe it to many of these experts because they came together and put work into that vision, and we've seen some really great results. But we also realize that collaboration is hard. And sometimes Nina and I have found ourselves asking, what were we thinking? Should we have just danced and went home? Did we need to write something so that the next time we submit a proposal? And so we've learned that collaboration requires intentionality. The second is the illusion of comprehensiveness. When you hear about socioeconomic studies, you may think it's just about going there and talking to the fisher and collecting some data. And much of the time, that's what most of us think. And while we have done quite a lot of work, we've only scratched the surface. And so the illusion of comprehensiveness is realizing that it takes a long time to understand a fishery, and it requires deep engagement with that fishery so that you don't miss the nuances and context when it comes to social cultural aspects such as networks, traditional practices, what people know and they are not telling you, art, and many other factors, including gender. And there are some really great papers that have come out of this work. One of our students just recently published a paper looking at the gender dynamics when it comes to artisanal fishers that are targeting billfish. There is a paper that came out on how art influences billfish fisheries. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this intentionality around looking at social cultural factors can help us understand socioeconomic aspects in a more comprehensive way without that top layer or top surface understanding. Last but not least, is the illusion of technological advancement. And I brought this picture back because when we were commissioned by FAO, one of our work was to develop a standardized sport fishing data collection platform for these countries. And we did that. We tested it. It was successful. But then when it came to rolling out on the ground, it turned out that some of the National Fisheries Institutional offices, while we had developed the database on Microsoft 2016, they were using 2003. And so the question is, how can we solve the disconnect between technological advancement and the integration of data? And there's been very many talks here that are encouraging. But you know, when Nelly goes to the field, this is the illusion and reality that we have to face. Like if you give me a tablet and tell me, here, go and collect data, the question is this even accessible to some of these places that we work? And for many of you that are interested in technology, you know that sub-Saharan Africa is leading when it comes to mobile banking. But that's not the case when we want to translate it to the realities of data collection when it comes to fisheries in our region. And I'm always excited to see some of the examples that have come out of South Africa and other places, because it's a vision we remain to achieve. There is the illusion of immediate capacity. I talked about our students, our interns, our early career researchers. And one of the lessons, which is a common lesson, and many of you that work with young people, emerging leaders, you can attest to, is it takes a long time to build a leader. But at the same time, when we are limited with funding timelines and project timelines and many factors that we cannot control, it becomes an illusion to say that I am going to develop capacity, X capacity, so that we are not the only ones going to a conference and talking about these fisheries, because it becomes tiring. You listen to yourself until you're like, I don't know if I have anything to say, because you've been the only voice that has been at these multiple conferences, and when you start to talk, people can already know what you're going to say. And so we would love to change that story. In conclusion, I do recognize that we stand at the intersection of realities and illusions. But I always like to look at the positive side of things when I reflect on my journey coming from my village, 17 hours away by bus to the ocean, 17 hours plus to get to Berlin. I don't think Robert knew this, but it was a very long trip. And now 17 hours plus to get to the first time World Recreational Fishing Conference in the continent. It gives me hope that we are not isolated, and that the power of collective action actually helps us to face the realities, at the same time acknowledge that illusions will be there so that we can be inspired. And so to finalize my reflection, I invite you to join me in these 4 thought processes. The first one is, when we think about sport and recreational fisheries in Africa with the case studies that I have provided, it calls for us to create genuine collaborations that transcend cultures transcend borders, transcend sectors, transcend government agencies, transcend individuals. The second thought process is communities. When we talk about communities, they shouldn't be in isolation. I was so excited to see Corey present yesterday about the work of the indigenous communities in Australia. And I remember when I was reflecting with you, Corey, I said, I long for a day. I know we've tried it, but I long for a day when communities will be part and parcel of conferences like this so that they are not elite. Because they are the stewards of this knowledge. And when I stand here as Dr. Nelly Kadagi, I owe it to these fishers that took me on their boats and taught me so much for a girl that knew nothing about the ocean. The third thought process is intentional investment in capacity development. I told Professor Warren that I was inspired to see him stand here yesterday and present Natana's work. I know to Professor Warren it might not have meant something, but it meant something to me that capacity development shouldn't be done on a fly. It has to be intentional for us to be able to say that in 10 years, 20 years, we have supported capabilities for more and more Africans to work on these species. The last thought process is mentorship. I like to reflect more and more on my relationship with Dr. Julian Pepperell, but I've also had the privilege of working with really great mentors that didn't clip my feathers or wings. They have allowed me to fly. And so I long for us to leave this room with that intentionality around saying that even where I am, I can mentor someone. And when I talk about mentorship, in my case, I don't mean a seasonal or seasoned expert mentoring a younger person. I too am a mentor to people that are way older than me in their career. And we've really benefited from that intergenerational exchange. And so I challenge us to look at mentorship in a different way than the traditional way of saying that I need to find a younger person and mentor. Young people, I challenge you in the room to also look around and say, who can I mentor? Because we need that diffusion of knowledge across generations. And so yesterday or Sunday, I lost track of days. On Sunday, it was very exciting to see many of us who gathered in the workshop with the aim of developing a community of practice for recreational fisheries research in Africa. Remember, this is 2026 when you're thinking about this. But as I said, I am a very optimistic and hopeful person that it is not late for us in the continent to do this. If we can bring the World Recreational Fishing Conference in South Africa, we too can say we have something to offer, because most of the time I get requests, Nelly, can you join this? Nelly, can you join this? Can you join this? It is good because it gives me exposure. But I long for a day when many of our researchers in the global north will look at knowledge exchange from an equal perspective, whereby a community of practice for Africa will allow us to exchange knowledge in a way that hasn't happened before, and see to it that we can continue to build this knowledge so that it's not just few people in Kenya, in Mozambique, and South Africa that study this fishery. And so, as I finish, I'm going to look around and invite all of us as we think about advancing research on sport and recreational fisheries to remember to lift as we rise. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Nelly. I really, yeah, you blew me away, to be honest. I think you blew the whole audience away. I think it's amazing. I think generally in recreational fisheries research, I think a lot of us are here because we fished recreationally as kids or were taught by our fathers or by other people that sort of brought us into this room and into this field. But I feel like it's so inspiring to see that somebody, who really didn't grow up with recreational fisheries was mentored, by the right people. And just through, your just reading books and seeing things on TV really got you inspired, and you followed that passion. And now you're giving a keynote to the World Recreational Fisheries Conference, and you're publishing in high-end journals, some of the highest impact fisheries journals globally with your work. So yeah, really well done, and thanks a lot for the time and the effort. And here's a small memento from us. So thanks a lot, and yeah, please everybody give Nelly another round of applause.